She spent 4 years perfecting the act of hating him. 4 years of sharp words, cold shoulders, and carefully maintained disdain, and every single second of it was a lie. Roman Voss doesn't ask for rooms. He owns them. 6'2", jaw carved from something harder than patience, eyes that have watched men beg and felt nothing. The most feared name on the East Coast criminal landscape, and the only man Savannah Cross has ever loved without permission. Tonight, at his own charity gala, surrounded by 500 people who would never dare cross him, Roman Voss is about to discover the one thing his empire couldn't protect him from. Her. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The night it started, Savannah was carrying a tray of champagne flutes she had no business carrying. That was the part she could never quite explain cleanly when she told the story later, because the truth was complicated, and the truth made her look either pathetic or unlucky, depending on who was listening. The honest version went like this. She had arrived 20 minutes late to the Voss family estate for her cousin Delia's engagement party, found the caterer's van blocking the only path to the front entrance, nearly knocked over one of the servers, caught the tray he dropped, and walked inside still holding it because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. She had been inside for maybe 4 minutes. The room was enormous, all high ceilings and imported marble, and the kind of lighting that made rich people look richer. A live jazz quartet played near the far windows. The guests were dressed in the kind of effortless wealth that takes decades of money to achieve. Soft fabrics, understated jewelry. The particular confidence of people who have never had to check a price tag. Savannah was wearing a black dress she'd borrowed from Delia and heels that were already threatening to destroy her left ankle. Her dark hair was pulled back, a few strands already escaping because that was simply what her hair did, regardless of effort or intention. She was scanning the room for a surface, any surface, to set the tray on when she heard his voice directly behind her. "We're running low on the billicart near the East Bar." She turned around. He was taller than she'd expected from across a room. Broader. The suit was charcoal, perfectly cut, the kind that costs more than 3 months of her rent. Dark hair, slightly longer on top, pushed back with the kind of careless precision that suggested he'd run a hand through it once, and it had simply obeyed. His jaw had a day's worth of shadow on it. His eyes, dark, sharp, assessing, moved over her face with the same efficient attention a man uses when reviewing a quarterly report. Not rude exactly, just completely indifferent to whether she was a person or furniture. "I'm sorry," Savannah said. "Billicart salmon, the rosé, East Bar." He said it slowly, like she might be struggling with the vocabulary. "Tell Marcus when you circle back." She stared at him. "I'm not..." "And the past hors d'oeuvres are getting backed up near the entrance. Get someone to clear that." He was already turning away. Something small and hot ignited behind Savannah's sternum. "Excuse me." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, which was not at all. "I don't work here." He turned back. The expression on his face was the particular blank patience of a man who has learned to listen to corrections without letting them cost him anything. "I work in nonprofit development," she said. "I'm a guest. Delia Cross is my cousin. I walked in holding this tray because I nearly knocked over one of your actual staff members outside, not because anyone hired me." A beat of silence. The man's eyes moved over her once more. Not the quick efficiency of before, but something slower, recalibrating. "My apologies," he said. His voice didn't change in tone or warmth, but the words were precise. "That was a mistaken assumption?" "It was a pretty large one." "It was." He accepted that without argument, which somehow made it worse. An apology she couldn't fight was harder to hold on to than an excuse she could push back against. "I'm Roman Voss." She knew the name. Of course she knew the name. It was printed on 3 different plaques in the entryway and embossed on every piece of stationery in the room. What she hadn't known until approximately 45 seconds ago was what the face attached to that name looked like, or that meeting it would feel like walking into a wall she hadn't seen coming. "Savannah Cross," she said. She did not say nice to meet you because it wasn't entirely. She held out the tray toward him. "Where do you want this?" Something shifted in his expression. It was brief, a flicker at the corner of his mouth that didn't commit to becoming a smile. "I'll have someone take it." "Please do." He snapped 2 fingers without raising his voice, and a staff member materialized from somewhere to Savannah's left and lifted the tray cleanly from her hands. Roman Voss watched this happen and then looked back at her. "Enjoy the party, Miss Cross." "I'll try," she said, despite the entrance. He held her gaze for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he walked away, and the room seemed to rearrange itself around his movement in the way rooms do around people who own them. Savannah stood there for a moment, left ankle aching, heart doing something irregular and annoying that she refused to examine. She found Delia 20 minutes later near the garden terrace, practically vibrating with the particular happiness of a woman who has just gotten engaged and wants everyone in her orbit to share in it. Savannah hugged her and meant it, accepted a glass of champagne from a tray carried by an actual server, and spent the next hour being introduced to people whose names she immediately forgot. She watched Roman Voss across the room without meaning to. He moved through his own party like a man fulfilling an obligation, present, impeccable, and entirely unreachable. He laughed at the right moments. He shook hands with the right firmness. He listened with the focused attention of someone who has learned that information is currency and conversation is how you collect it. Once, he caught her looking. He didn't look away first. Neither did she. They held it for 3 full seconds, and then Savannah turned back to the woman, telling her something about a renovation in the Hamptons, and made herself pay attention. She drove home that night with the windows down, the city rushing past her, and the distinct and unwelcome awareness that something had lodged itself in her chest that she did not have a name for yet. She would spend the next 4 years trying to dislodge it. She didn't see him again for 7 months. The second time was at a fundraiser for the Voss Foundation, one of Roman's legitimate operations, a charitable arm that directed money toward childhood literacy programs and after-school development. Savannah's nonprofit, a mid-sized organization called the Threshold Project focused on economic mobility for first-generation college graduates, had been invited as a potential partner organization. She had dressed carefully, not for him. She was absolutely clear with herself on that point. She had dressed carefully because this was a professional event with significant funding implications, and she needed to be taken seriously, and the navy dress she'd chosen was professional and sharp, and not at all selected with the memory of dark eyes doing a slow recalibration in mind. Roman was at the event. She had known he would be. It was his foundation's event. He recognized her. She could see it in the microsecond of adjustment when his gaze found her across the room. Not surprise exactly, but something that sharpened. "Ms. Cross?" He extended a hand. His grip was firm without performing firmness. "Mr. Voss." She shook it. "I hear you've been doing impressive work with the literacy initiative." "Your organization is doing good work with college retention," he said, which meant he'd read the materials. "The mentorship model is effective." "It is," she said. "We have the data to show it." "I'd like to see it." "I'd be happy to share it." That was the entire exchange. 45 seconds, clean and professional, and then they were both pulled away by other conversations, and the rest of the evening moved forward without incident, except that Savannah was acutely aware of where he was in the room for the rest of the night, except that when she drove home, she sat in her car outside her apartment for 6 minutes before going inside, just sitting in the quiet and not thinking about anything in particular. The rivalry, such as it was, developed over the following 2 years in the way these things do, not in large dramatic gestures, but in accumulated small frictions that calcified into something neither of them would name. They kept encountering each other. New York's philanthropic and business circles overlap in specific ways, and the Voss Foundation moved in spaces adjacent to where Savannah worked. She saw him at 4 separate events over 18 months. Each time, there was the professional courtesy. They both knew how to be polite in rooms full of people watching. And underneath it, something else. A current. An edge. She said something cutting at a panel discussion about equitable funding distribution. She hadn't aimed it at him directly, but he was on the panel, and the argument was responsive to a point he'd made, and the room understood exactly who she was pushing back against. He'd looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between irritated and interested, and responded with 3 sentences that were precise enough to sting. He'd been right, actually. That made it worse. At a gala in March, someone introduced them to each other as though they'd never met. Roman had looked at her and said, "We know each other." And something about the simple certainty of it had gotten under her skin in a way she couldn't explain later. We've been in the same rooms a few times, Savannah had corrected. That's what I said, he replied, and moved on. And she spent 20 minutes afterward running the exchange in her head, trying to figure out who had won it. She told her best friend Kezia about him exactly once, 6 months into the pattern, and regretted it immediately. You have a thing for him, Kezia said, over takeout containers spread across Savannah's kitchen table. I have a profound professional skepticism about men who use charitable foundations as reputation management. That's a long sentence for someone who doesn't have a thing. He assumed I was catering staff at our first meeting, and you've thought about it approximately 400 times since. I've thought about it because it was insulting. You've thought about it, Kezia said, pointing a fork at her, because the man who insulted you had the kind of face you think about. Savannah threw a napkin at her and changed the subject and did not mention Roman Voss to Kezia again for a long time. The gala where everything changed was in October. The Voss Foundation's annual benefit, black tie, ballroom of the Leland Hotel in Midtown, 500 guests, and enough combined net worth in the room to solve several medium-sized infrastructure problems if anyone had been inclined to. The foundation was announcing a new nationwide initiative, something significant, and Savannah was there because the Threshold Project had been included in preliminary conversations about partnership organizations. She arrived alone. Kezia had offered to come and Savannah had declined, which in retrospect was either honest self-knowledge or a failure of self-preservation. She hadn't yet decided. The room was everything these rooms always were. Beautiful and slightly suffocating and full of people performing versions of themselves that were about 30% more polished than their actual selves. Savannah was good at these events. She had learned the particular skill of being warm without being available, engaged without being capturable, sharp without being threatening. It was a skill set that had taken years to develop and that she deployed with quiet efficiency. She was an hour in, talking to the director of a foundation based in Philadelphia, when Harrison Alcott found her. She knew who he was: private equity, aggressive reputation, 40-something with the specific energy of a man who had been told yes his entire life and had stopped knowing how to process other answers. He'd approached her once before at a different event, and she'd deflected cleanly and thought that would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. Savannah Cross! He said her name like he was confirming an order. I was hoping to run into you. Harrison. She kept her voice neutral. Good evening. The Philadelphia director excused herself with the particular graceful efficiency of someone who has attended enough of these events to recognize when a third party is unwelcome. Savannah watched her go and kept her expression pleasant. Harrison moved slightly closer. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of encroachment that is designed to be deniable if called out. I've been reading more about your organization, he said. I think there might be real synergy there. I'd love to continue that conversation somewhere quieter. I'm happy to have our teams connect, Savannah said. I can have my development director reach out to... I was thinking more direct than that. His hand touched her elbow, light, brief, purposeful. There's a lounge on the 4th floor, much easier to talk. I'm good here, thanks. She stepped back. One step, clean, creating space without drama. He closed it again. Slightly less space returned than she'd taken. You're hard to get a hold of, he said. The tone had shifted almost imperceptibly, the easy confidence thickening into something with more pressure in it. I've reached out twice. I know. My team responded to both. I was hoping to hear from you personally. That's not how I work, Harrison. Organization to organization. Savannah. He said it like a correction. She became very still. Not frozen. Still. The kind of stillness that is its own kind of assessment. She was calculating, the distance to other people, the proximity of staff, the specific math of a public space that was somehow feeling less public than it had 60 seconds ago. I think we're done with this conversation, she said. Her voice was even. Have a good evening. She turned to go. His hand closed on her wrist, not violently, not with force that would leave a mark, just a hand on her wrist, fingers wrapping around it, the particular grip of a man communicating that he decides when conversations end. Savannah went very cold. I just want to... Let go of her wrist. The voice came from directly behind Harrison Alcott. Low, flat, completely without inflection. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because it has never needed it. The kind of voice that sounds exactly the same whether it's ordering champagne or ending a man's professional existence. Harrison's hand released her wrist. He turned around slowly. Roman Voss stood perhaps 3 feet away. He wasn't touching anyone. He wasn't raising his voice. He was standing the way he always stood, entirely self-contained, absolutely present. But something in his expression had changed from the version of him Savannah had spent 4 years cataloging. The professional courtesy, the controlled warmth, the careful performance of a powerful man who has learned when to be approachable. All of it was simply gone. What was left was something considerably older and considerably less patient. Roman. Harrison's voice had gone carefully casual. I didn't realize. I know you didn't. Roman's eyes moved to Harrison's face and stayed there with the fixed quality of something being studied under glass. Ms. Cross was walking away. You stopped her. It was just, you put your hand on her. The room had not gone silent. The party continued around them. The music played. Conversations moved forward at every table and cluster of people within 20 feet. But the immediate space they occupied had developed a specific quality, a held breath. Harrison Alcott was not a small man, and he was not, as a rule, someone who backed down in professional spaces. But he took one step backward. It wasn't anything, he said. Roman looked at him for another moment. Then it should be easy to end. He said it without inflection. I'd like you to enjoy the rest of the evening somewhere that isn't here. It wasn't a request. There was nothing in the phrasing that invited response or negotiation. It was a sentence that contained the entire weight of what Roman Voss was, the legitimate business empire, the foundation with its 500 guests, the criminal network that polite people in this room pretended not to know about, delivered in 8 words that Harrison Alcott clearly understood completely. He left. Savannah stood very still for a moment. Her wrist felt fine. Nothing had happened to it. No real force had been applied, but she was aware of it in a way that had nothing to do with injury. She breathed carefully and turned to face Roman. He was looking at her. The hard focus had shifted into something else. Not softer exactly, but different, checking. Are you all right? He asked. The question landed with unexpected weight. Not are you okay with its casual American deflection built in, but are you all right? Precise, direct, genuinely wanting the actual answer. Yes, she said. Thank you. He nodded. A muscle moved in his jaw. He looked in the direction Harrison had gone and then back at her. He's done this before, Roman said. It wasn't a question. At another event, I handled it. You were handling it. Yes, I know. He said it without apology. I wasn't suggesting otherwise. She looked at him. 4 years of sharp exchanges and careful distance, and the enormous effortful architecture of convincing herself that what she felt in rooms with this man was contempt. And right now, all of it felt profoundly thin, like paper held up to light. Why do you keep showing up in my vicinity? She said. The words came out before she'd finished deciding to say them. Something happened in his expression. A shift. Controlled immediately, but not before she saw it. This is my event, he said. It was also your event 4 years ago when you assumed I was carrying champagne glasses for a living. The corner of his mouth did the thing it occasionally did. That movement that didn't fully commit to anything. I apologized for that. You did, without particular emotion. I don't do emotion publicly. I've noticed. They stood there for a moment. The music was playing something slow and elaborate. Somewhere behind them, someone laughed at something. The entire room continued existing around them, and neither of them looked at any of it. You're very good at pretending I irritate you, Roman said. Her chest tightened. I'm not pretending. All right. He said it the way he said most things, accepting it, not fighting it, which was somehow its own form of aggression. You do irritate me, she said, slightly louder than necessary. You're arrogant and you move through the world like it's been rearranged for your convenience, and you have the specific confidence of a man who has never had to wonder whether he belongs in a room. None of that is inaccurate. It's not a compliment. I didn't take it as one. Good. Silence. The initiative we're announcing tonight, Roman said, and his voice had shifted back to something more professional. The gear changed smooth enough that she almost missed what had just happened between them. Your organization would be a strong fit for the implementation phase. I'd like to talk about it more specifically. That's, She paused, recalibrated. Yes, I'd like that. I'll have my office reach out. Your office reaches out in response to things. I don't know if it initiates. It will? He held her gaze for one more second. Enjoy the rest of the evening, Ms. Cross. He walked away. Savannah breathed. She picked up a glass of water from a passing tray and stood very quietly for 30 seconds, assembling herself back into the version of herself that had walked into this room. Her phone buzzed. Kazia, texting. How's the rich people party? Savannah looked at the message. Looked at where Roman was now standing 20 feet away, already in conversation with someone else, his back to her, completely composed. She typed back, fine, uneventful. She put the phone in her clutch. She was a very good liar. She always had been. But the lie was getting heavier every year she carried it. The call came on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the gala. Savannah was in a back-to-back stretch of grant review meetings, the kind of day where you drink cold coffee and forget to eat and surface at 6 p.m., feeling like you've run through sand. Her assistant Julia knocked on her glass office door at 11:15 and held up a sticky note with wide eyes that communicated, "This is significant," without any words. Roman Voss. Personal cell. Please call at your earliest convenience. She looked at the sticky note for a moment. Then she put it face down on her desk and finished the meeting she was in. She called him back at 12:40, eating half a sandwich at her desk with the door closed. He picked up on the second ring. Ms. Cross? Mr. Voss, I got your message. I appreciate you calling back. No preamble, no ambient small talk. I want to offer you a position. She set the sandwich down. Shao, what kind of position? Creative Director for the Voss Foundation's National Charitable Initiative. It's a 3-year commitment, significant budget, nationwide scope. We're targeting educational access, economic mobility, youth development, areas where your background is directly relevant. She was quiet for a moment. The office sounds moved around her. She could hear Julia on a call outside the glass, the ventilation system, the ambient city beyond the windows. Why me specifically? She asked. Because you're good at it. He said it without any particular gentleness, which made it land more like fact than flattery. Your model at the Threshold Project has metrics that most organizations with 3 times your funding can't match. You know how to move money toward outcomes instead of overhead, and you don't perform for donors. That last quality isn't usually considered a professional asset. It is by me. She picked up her pen, put it down. This would mean working closely with you. With the foundation, yes. And with you. A beat. That's accurate. We have a somewhat complicated history. We have a professional history with some personal friction, he said. That's manageable. I'm not sure I agree with your assessment. I know you're not. Something in his voice. Careful. That's part of why I think you're the right person for this. Savannah stared at the wall across from her desk. A corkboard covered in project timelines and printouts, and one photograph from a site visit 2 years ago. A group of kids at a community center in the Bronx laughing at something off camera. I'll need to see the full proposal, she said. Scope, timeline, budget structure, reporting lines. I'll have it sent today. I'll review it over the weekend and we can talk next week. That works? She almost ended the call. Mr. Voss? Yes. If I take this, and I'm not saying I am, I need to be clear that I operate with full autonomy over programmatic decisions. I don't run things by committee for cosmetic approval, and I don't adjust outcomes to protect public relations narratives. I wouldn't offer you the role if I wanted someone who did. She absorbed that. Okay. I'll send the documents. Thank you. She hung up the phone. She sat there for a long time after, not moving, the half-eaten sandwich growing staler beside her and the city existing in its usual indifferent roar beyond the glass. And something in her chest that she had spent 4 years compressing very carefully was beginning, with the slow inevitability of things that have been held down too long, to push back up toward the surface. She picked up her phone and opened a text to Kezia. She started typing 3 different messages. Deleted all of them. She put the phone face down on the desk. She pulled the proposal documents when they arrived at 3 p.m. and read them with her full professional attention, and the initiative was exactly what he described. Serious money, serious scope, the kind of project that could actually move a needle at scale. And she knew before she finished reading that she was going to say yes. She had known, if she was being honest with herself, from the moment his voice came through the phone. The question she couldn't answer yet was whether she was saying yes to the work or to something larger and considerably more dangerous. On Monday morning, she drafted her reply. She stared at it for 4 minutes. Then she hit send. Quote. The first week working at the Voss Foundation offices felt like learning to walk in a different atmosphere. The building was in Midtown, not the kind of aggressive glass tower that announced its own importance, but something older, heavier, with the weight of serious money in its bones. The foundation occupied 3 floors, and the staff operated with the particular competence of people who had been hired by someone who did not tolerate mediocrity and had learned that quickly. Savannah's office was on the 22nd floor corner position, more window than wall. She spent the first 2 hours of her first morning simply setting up the space the way she needed it to be. Papers organized, her specific systems in place, before she let herself begin thinking about anything else. She met with the foundation's deputy director, a sharp-minded woman named Priya Nair, who laid out the operational structure with impressive clarity. She reviewed the partner organization files. She had 3 hours of meetings with various department heads. She was thorough and professional and gave nothing away. And by 4 o'clock, she thought she might have made it through the entire day without any of the complications she had been bracing for. At 4:15, Roman walked into her office. He knocked on the open door. A courtesy, she noted. He was in a dark suit, jacket on, no tie, which was apparently his particular version of business casual. He looked exactly as he always looked, like a man who has calculated the amount of space he's entitled to occupy and arrived at an amount that is simply all of it. "How was the first day?" he asked. "Productive," she said. "Priya is excellent." "She is." He leaned against the door frame, not entering. "You're reorganizing the partner intake process." It wasn't a question. He had clearly already heard something from someone. "I'm looking at it," Savannah said. "The current structure creates a 6-week lag between initial contact and first funding conversation. That's too long." "Agreed. I'm going to propose a tiered response system. I'll have a draft by end of week." "Good." He looked at her for a moment. "You've been here one day." "Was that a complaint?" "No." Again, that movement at the corner of his mouth. "I was noting the pace. If you hired me to move slowly, you have significant information about me that I lack." He looked at her for another moment. Something in his eyes, not quite warm, something more complicated than warm. Attentive, like a man who is paying the kind of careful attention that costs him something. "Dinner is ordered for the 6th floor at 6, he said. "Working session, senior staff. You should be there." "I'll be there." He pushed off the doorframe, turned to go. "Mr. Voss?" He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for the opportunity. I mean that." He looked back at her. "You're going to do excellent work here. I didn't do you any favors. I made a good hire." He left. Savannah turned back to her desk. Her heart was doing that thing again, the irregular, inconvenient thing she had no good name for. She pressed both hands flat on the surface of the desk and breathed through it. She was a professional. She was here to do a job that mattered. She was going to do it with everything she had. And she was absolutely, completely, categorically not going to let Roman Voss become her problem. She picked up her pen. She started working. Outside the window, the city spread itself in every direction, indifferent and enormous, full of its own complicated truths. And somewhere down the hall, in an office that she was already aware of the exact location of without having meant to learn it, Roman Voss was working too. Both of them moving, for now, in parallel. Both of them pretending that was all it was. Mulsham. 3 weeks into the job, Savannah found the file. She wasn't looking for it. She was doing a standard audit of historical grant disbursements, tracing funding patterns to understand where the foundation had been before she arrived, and how to build a more coherent strategy going forward. It was late, maybe 8 p.m., most of the floor empty, just the ambient hum of the building and the scattered lights of the city through the windows. The file was labeled simply Meridian, 2019, and it contained correspondence, financial transfers, and internal memos that painted a picture she had not expected. The Voss Foundation, 4 years earlier, had quietly redirected a significant sum, 7 figures, from a legitimate real estate venture into an emergency fund that had provided housing, legal support, and relocation assistance to 11 families displaced by a gang-related fire in the South Bronx. No press, no announcement, no public record. Roman's signature was on every transfer authorization. Savannah sat with the file open in front of her for a long time. She thought about the man who had stood behind Harrison Alcott at the gala. The voice without inflection, the absolute absence of performance. The man who moved through rooms like someone who has learned that power and cruelty are not the same thing, even if the world keeps trying to conflate them. She thought about the first night, 4 years ago, at the engagement party. The cold efficiency of his gaze before it softened into something she'd spent years telling herself she hadn't seen. She closed the file. She picked up her phone and looked at his number in her contacts. She had it now because of the job, because of the professional necessity, not for any other reason, and she did not call him. She put the phone in her bag. She packed up her work. She took the elevator down, walked through the lobby into the cool October air, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her face tilted slightly upward. The city pressed in from every side, noise and light, and the particular indifferent energy of 8 million people navigating their own complicated lives. Savannah Cross, who was very good at making decisions and extremely bad at lying to herself when the lying started to cost too much, understood in that moment with complete clarity what she was in the middle of. The question was no longer whether she had feelings for Roman Voss. The question was whether she had enough of herself left to keep pretending she didn't. And the answer, she was beginning to suspect, was no. The question after that was considerably more dangerous. What happened when the pretending stopped? She started walking toward the subway. 3 blocks down, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting Keziah, expecting Julia, expecting anything in the world except the name she saw on the screen. Roman Voss. 1 text message. Still in the office. You left the Meridian file on your desk. I put it back in archive. RV, she stared at the message for a very long time. He had been in her office. He had seen what she'd been looking at. He knew she knew. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought about what to write. She thought about the 11 families in the South Bronx who had no idea who had helped them. She thought about the way Roman Voss had looked at her tonight at the gala 4 years ago, and every time since. That specific assessing attention that wasn't about power and wasn't about want, but was something harder to name and considerably harder to survive. She typed, "Thank you." Sent it. Walked another half block. Her phone buzzed again. "Good work today." 3 words. No context, no particular warmth. But from Roman Voss, she was beginning to understand. 3 words like that meant something considerably larger than their surface area. She put the phone back in her bag. She walked faster. Behind her, in an office on the 22nd floor, a light was still on. And the man inside it was looking at his phone. And something was already in motion between them that neither of them had agreed to yet. Something that was going to be very difficult to stop. The text sat in her phone for 3 days before Savannah did anything about it. Not because she was avoiding it. That was what she told herself. That she was busy, that the first month of a new position demanded a specific kind of total attention that left no room for other processing. She told herself this in the morning while making coffee. She told herself this on the subway. She told herself this at her desk while the cursor blinked on documents she was supposed to be reviewing, and her eyes drifted to the window where the city sat in its usual indifferent gray. She was avoiding it. Obviously. She was avoiding the text and the file and the specific quality of Roman's voice when he'd said "good work today" in 3 words that shouldn't have meant anything and had meant considerably more than that. On the 4th day, Savannah Cross decided she was done being a coward about things she didn't have the luxury of being a coward about. She walked into his office at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning without an appointment. His assistant, a precise man named Daniel, who had the particular composure of someone who had learned to be unshockable, looked up from his desk with professional neutrality. "Ms. Cross, is he in?" "He has a call at 9:30. "I won't need long." Daniel looked at her for exactly 1 second, then picked up his phone, said 3 words into it, listened, and nodded. Go ahead. Roman was at his desk when she pushed the door open. Not behind it, he was standing at the window to the right of it, phone pressed to his ear, one hand in his jacket pocket. He looked over when she entered. He held up 2 fingers, 2 minutes, and turned back to the window. Savannah stood just inside the door and waited. The office was spare. That surprised her the first time she'd seen it. She'd expected something more aggressive, more ornate, the physical performance of a powerful man's ego. Instead, it was clean lines and dark wood and very few personal objects. A photograph on the credenza, small, in a plain frame. She was too far away to see it clearly. "Push it to Thursday," Roman said into the phone. His voice had that quality she'd been cataloging for 4 years. Flat, authoritative, not rude, but entirely unwilling to accommodate resistance. "No, Thursday." A pause. "Then tell him Thursday works better for my schedule, and he can decide if it works for his." He ended the call. He looked at her. He didn't ask what she wanted or why she was there. He just waited, which was its own form of pressure. "The Meridian file," she said. "Yes." "Why was there no public record?" He set his phone on the desk. "That's what you came to ask?" Those families had no idea who helped them. That was the point. She looked at him. "That's not how foundations typically operate." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." "So why?" "Because 11 families needed help and announcements wouldn't have fed anyone." He said it without heat, just the flat fact of it. We didn't need the credit. They needed the resources. Savannah was quiet for a moment. "That's not how you build a public reputation." "I'm not trying to build a public reputation." He looked at her steadily. "I'm trying to build something that actually works." She absorbed that. The city moved outside his window, traffic, a plane crossing somewhere above the overcast, the constant low percussion of 8 million lives in motion. "You knew I'd find it," she said. "I knew you'd be thorough enough to find it, yes. And you wanted me to." He was quiet for a beat. "I wanted you to understand what you'd signed on for." "And what is that exactly?" He moved away from the window, sat in the chair across from his own desk rather than behind it, a choice that registered somewhere in her peripheral awareness as deliberate. "A foundation that actually does what it says it does," he said. "Not a reputation management exercise, not a tax structure, work." Most people would have led with that in the interview. Most people would have been impressed by the budget and the title. "I'm not most people." "I know." He looked at her directly. "Not with the assessing efficiency of the first night 4 years ago. Something different." "That's why you're here." The room was very quiet for a moment. The radiator against the far wall ticked once. Savannah made herself hold the gaze and not interpret it. "Okay," she said. "I needed to know that." "Is that all?" She thought about saying yes. It was the correct professional answer. It was the answer that kept everything in its appropriate column. "The photograph on your credenza," she said instead, and then immediately wasn't sure why she'd said it. "Who is it?" Something shifted in his face. Not closing, more like a door that was usually shut acknowledging the knock. "My sister," he said. "Clara, she's 26. Savannah nodded. She had heard, over years of moving in adjacent circles, fragments of Roman Voss's history. The kind of fragments that circulate about powerful men because powerful men are always being discussed. She knew the mother had died when Roman was young. She knew he'd taken over his father's operations at an age when most people were still figuring out what they wanted to study. She hadn't known about a sister. "She's in Seattle," Roman said. "Architecture firm. Does she know what you do?" "Which part?" The question landed flat and honest, the way only genuinely complicated questions do. Savannah met his eyes. "Both parts." "She knows both parts." He said it without apology or explanation. "She made her peace with it years ago." "Did you?" He looked at her for a moment. His jaw moved slightly, not the preparatory shift of someone about to say something false, but the involuntary response of someone who's been asked something that has a real answer they're not sure they want to give. "I'm working on it," he said. Savannah nodded. She picked up her folder. She'd brought it as cover, the professional prop of a woman arriving for a work conversation, and stood. "Thursday at 10. I want to walk you through the partner intake restructure before I present it to the full team." I'll be here. She walked to the door. Savannah. She stopped. He had used her first name exactly twice in 4 years. Both times it had landed like a hand on her shoulder, specific and warm and slightly startling. Thank you for asking, he said, about Clara. She didn't turn around. You're welcome. She walked out. She made it to her own office before she sat down heavily in her chair and pressed her palms flat on the desk and breathed through the thing in her chest that had no good name and was getting harder to ignore every single day she spent in this building. The weeks that followed had a particular kind of momentum. The initiative was serious work, the kind that pulls you under and keeps you there for hours without surfacing, the kind that makes you forget to eat and rewards you for it because you can look at what you've built at the end of a long day and feel something real. Savannah had spent years doing meaningful work on small budgets with insufficient staff, grinding out outcomes through sheer force of infrastructure and persistence. Suddenly, having actual resources felt like she wasn't sure, like being handed the tools she'd been building approximations of her whole career. She moved fast. The partner intake restructure went through in 10 days. She rebuilt the grant cycle timeline. She started calling program officers at potential partner organizations herself, rather than waiting for the formal correspondence chain, because formal correspondence chains took weeks, and she wanted to know in the first 10 minutes of a real conversation whether an organization's values were genuine or performed. Roman noticed. She could tell because he stopped doing the professional check-ins that she understood were a form of management and started doing something that looked more like genuine engagement. He'd appear in her office doorway at odd hours, never disruptively, always with a specific question or a relevant document. And the conversations that started as work conversations kept developing edges. The Houston partner, he said one afternoon, dropping a file on her desk. Priya has concerns about their financial reporting. Savannah had already read it. Their reporting is fine. Priya is concerned about their board composition. She's right to be. Their board composition is their board composition. We're not funding their governance, we're funding their program delivery. Their program delivery is excellent. He sat in the chair across her desk. He'd started doing that, occupying the chair across from her with the specific ease of someone who had decided that space was available to him. She had not told him he was wrong. You're not worried about the liability exposure? I'm worried about it, she said. I've built in quarterly financial reviews and a program audit at month 8. If the board situation creates actual delivery problems, we have exit clauses. He looked at the file, back at her. You built in the exits before you approved the partnership. I always build in the exits. Something in his expression, recognition maybe, the look of someone who has just heard a rule they recognize as their own stated by someone else. Okay, he said. Okay? Proceed with Houston. She raised an eyebrow. Thank you for the approval. That was sarcastic. A little. She pulled the file toward her. I was proceeding regardless. He looked at her for a moment. I know you were. Then why say okay? Because, he said, standing, I wanted you to know I agreed. There's a difference between proceeding because you've decided you're right and proceeding because you've decided you're right and your boss concurs. She watched him stand. Is that management philosophy? It's just accurate. You're less terrible at this than I expected. He stopped at the door. I'll put that on my tombstone. He left. Savannah sat in the quiet he'd left behind and stared at the Houston file without reading it for a long moment. This was the problem. This was the exact problem that she had identified and categorized and been trying to manage for weeks now. Roman Voss was less terrible at most things than she'd been using as a working assumption for 4 years. And every time she recalibrated that assumption downward toward a more honest position, she lost another layer of the protective distance she'd built. She picked up her phone, typed to Kezia, quick question. Kezia replied in 40 seconds. Is it about the Mafia Boss? Savannah stared at the message. He's not. It's more complicated than that. It's always more complicated than that when you're in love with someone. She locked her phone and put it face down. She was not going to have this conversation over text. She was also, and this was the part she kept arriving at and backing away from like a ledge she wasn't ready to step off. She was not going to be able to keep having this conversation only with herself. The conflict broke open on a Wednesday afternoon in the third week of November, and it broke the way real conflicts do. Not in the moment you've been bracing for, but sideways through a door you weren't watching. Savannah was in the conference room with two of the Foundation's senior program officers, Derek Haynes, who had been with the Foundation for 6 years and had the particular confidence of someone who's never had to defend his territory before, and Marcia Webb, who was sharper than Derek and knew it and was polite enough not to say so. They were reviewing the revised budget allocation for the initiative's first deployment phase. Savannah had restructured the allocation significantly. She'd moved substantial funding from what she privately thought of as the visibility work, the brand-building components, the press-friendly programming, the events that looked good in photographs, into direct service delivery and partner capacity building. Derek did not like the restructure. This takes 15% out of the communications and outreach budget, he said. He was saying it for the third time, each iteration slightly more pointed. 13%, Savannah said, and redirects it into program staff support for 12 partner organizations. The communications work is foundational. It's how we demonstrate impact to donors. We demonstrate impact to donors by having impact. Derek set his pen down. Ms. Cross, I appreciate the perspective, but this initiative has a stakeholder communication requirement that I've read the stakeholder communication requirements. She kept her voice even, not cold, even. They specify regular reporting and transparency about outcomes. They don't specify a particular budget allocation for brand events. The events are how we look like we're doing something, Savannah said. The program staff are how we actually do something. Silence. Derek looked at Marcia. Marcia looked at the table with the careful neutrality of someone who agreed with Savannah and was waiting to see if she needed to say so. I'm going to need to flag this to Roman, Derek said. Flag whatever you need to flag, Savannah said. My recommendation stands. Derek left the meeting 10 minutes later with the specific energy of a man who has decided to escalate. Savannah watched him go, finished reviewing the remaining line items with Marcia, and returned to her office. Roman was in it. Not at her desk, standing at the window, the way he sometimes stood at his own window, looking at the city. He turned when she came in. Derek came to you, she said. He did. She set her folder on the desk. Did he explain the restructure or just explain that he didn't like it? Mostly the second. Roman looked at her. Walk me through it. She did. 7 minutes, clean, the numbers and the reasoning and the projected outcomes laid out without performance or defense, just the actual logic of what she'd done and why. When she was finished, Roman was quiet for a moment. Derek's been here 6 years, he said. I know. He's good at what he does. He is. He's also been doing a version of what he does that has prioritized the appearance of this foundation's work over its delivery, and I think he's been doing it long enough that he doesn't see them as separate things anymore. Roman's jaw shifted. That's a significant characterization. Yes, she said. It is. It's also accurate. You've been here 6 weeks. I know how long I've been here. Her voice had gone slightly harder. She could hear it, the edge coming in, the specific sharpness she deployed when she was tired and being pushed in a direction she'd already made a decision about. That's not a counter-argument to the numbers. That's a counter-argument to me. He looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light was flat and gray through the windows. His expression was doing the thing it occasionally did. Layers underneath the controlled surface, things moving behind the stillness that she had no clean way to read. Is this how it's going to work? He said. His voice had gone quieter. Not softer. Quieter. What do you mean? You deciding you're right and treating any pushback as a personal attack. The words landed somewhere specific and unpleasant. She felt her breath change slightly, not sharpen, but deepen, the involuntary response of someone who's been touched in a place they didn't know was tender. I'm not... She stopped, recalibrated. I'm not treating the pushback as a personal attack. I'm pointing out that Derek's objection was to my presence here, not to my analysis. Maybe both. Maybe both, she agreed. The analysis still stands. I know it does. He moved away from the window, toward the desk, toward her, and stopped a few feet away in the specific way he did. That calculation of appropriate distance that she had become hyper-aware of over weeks of shared space. But if you can't hear pushback without hearing it as a challenge to your authority, this is going to be a very difficult environment. I can hear pushback. Her voice was controlled. Very controlled. I have heard a significant amount of pushback in my career and incorporated what was valid and pushed back against what wasn't. That's not the same as being unable to handle criticism. What is it the same as? Knowing the difference. He was quiet. His eyes were on her face with that particular attention, the kind that cost him something, that she kept noticing cost him something. Most people looked at her with evaluation or warmth or want or various combinations of the above. Roman looked at her like someone trying to solve something that kept revealing new complexity every time he thought he'd gotten close. The restructure goes through, he said. She blinked. What? Your allocation. It goes through. He picked up the folder she'd set on the desk, looked at the top page, set it back down. I'll talk to Derek. You were just telling me I can't hear pushback. I was telling you that you need to be able to distinguish between the two things. I wasn't telling you you were wrong. He looked at her directly. You're not wrong. The room was very quiet again. Then what was the point of the last 5 minutes? She asked. Her voice had gone slightly raw. She could hear it, the professional veneer wearing thin at the edges. The point, Roman said, is that you're going to be working with Derek for 3 years, and you need him, not his approval, his institutional knowledge, and his donor relationships and his network, which means you need to find a way to work with him that doesn't make him feel like he's been written off entirely. She stared at him. That's political. I was going to say pragmatic. Same thing. He held her gaze. You can be right and still lose if you don't manage the room. I know how to manage rooms. I know you do. His voice had shifted. Quieter again, but different, lower. I'm not questioning your competence. Then what are you questioning? He was still for a moment. Whether you'll let yourself need help. The question dropped into the quiet between them and sat there. She felt her jaw tighten, felt the automatic resistance that had been her first and most reliable defense mechanism for most of her adult life rearing up with its usual efficiency. I don't, she started. You do everything yourself, he said. I've watched you for 6 weeks, and I've watched you before that for 4 years. You walk into rooms and figure out everything you need within the first 10 minutes, and then you execute on your own, and you do it well. But you don't ask for help. You don't let people in. The words were too accurate. That was the problem with them. They were the specific, targeted accuracy of someone who had been paying a particular kind of attention, and being seen that clearly by Roman Voss felt like standing in a light she hadn't consented to stand in. That's not a character flaw, she said. That's a functional approach to a professional environment. In some environments, his voice was very even. In this one, you have people who could help you, if you'd let them. I'm perfectly capable of, I know you're capable. Something moved through his expression. Brief, not entirely controlled. That's not what I'm talking about. She looked at him. The flat November light, the city outside the glass, the space between them that was approximately 4 feet and had somehow developed the specific density of something much less than that. Then what are you talking about? Her voice came out lower than she intended. He looked at her for a moment, and for once, for the first time in 4 years of carefully maintained control, the thing behind his eyes didn't fully stay behind his eyes. Savannah. Her name. Just her name, in his voice, in that specific register. And somehow, that was the most dangerous thing he'd said to her in 6 weeks or 4 years, or possibly ever. She didn't move. Neither did he. The door opened. Daniel appeared in the frame. Mr. Voss, your 4 o'clock is here. Roman didn't look away from her immediately. 1 beat, 2. Then he looked at Daniel. Give me 2 minutes. Daniel closed the door. Roman picked up his jacket from the back of her chair. She hadn't noticed he'd set it there, and looked at her one more time. Talk to Derek tomorrow. Don't win. Just make him feel like a colleague. And if he isn't one? Act like he is until he becomes one. He walked out. Savannah stood in the middle of her own office, completely still, heart going at a pace that had nothing to do with the argument and everything to do with the way he had said her name. and told herself very clearly and without any real conviction at all that she had everything under control. The Boston trip was not her idea. It came up in the last week of November. A 2-day site visit with a major potential partner organization, a large educational nonprofit based in the city that had been in preliminary discussions with the foundation for months. In-person meetings, facility tours, the specific relationship-building work that couldn't be done over video calls. Priya was supposed to go. Priya's mother had a health crisis on a Monday morning, and Priya was on a flight to Phoenix by noon. Roman came to Savannah's office at 2 p.m. "Boston is Thursday and Friday." She looked up from her screen. "I know. Priya's out." "I know that too." He looked at her. "I'm going. You should come." She held his gaze. "Both of us. The partner needs to meet the creative director. This is the right time. We could send Marcus." "Marcus doesn't know the initiative the way you do." He set a folder on her desk. "Train schedules. We can take the 7 a.m. Thursday and be back Friday evening." She looked at the folder, looked at him. "You're not asking." "I'm asking," he said. "But yes, it makes sense for you to come." She picked up the folder, looked at the train schedules with the same careful attention she gave everything, which was also a delay tactic, and they both probably knew it. "Fine," she said. "Thursday." "Thursday." He picked up his jacket, left. Savannah looked at the train schedules for another moment after the door closed. Then she set them down and went back to her screen and did not allow herself to think about the specific arithmetic of 2 people on a train to Boston and what that kind of proximity over 2 days tends to do to the careful distances people spend months building. She was a professional. She was here to do a job. She was also, as Kezia would have pointed out with zero hesitation, in very serious trouble. The train left Penn Station at 7:15 Thursday morning. Gray dawn barely settled over the city, the platform cold and functional and full of the specific, exhausted efficiency of commuters who are too tired for anything but forward motion. Roman was already on the platform when she arrived. Dark coat, travel bag, coffee in each hand. He held one out to her when she reached him. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. "You guessed my order." "Black, no sugar." It wasn't a guess. She raised an eyebrow. "You pay attention to how I take my coffee." "I pay attention to everything," he said, and turned toward the train. And Savannah stood on the platform for 1 second in the cold morning air, holding her coffee, and trying to locate the part of herself that was still pretending this was a simple professional arrangement. She couldn't find it. She got on the train. The meeting in Boston went well. The partner organization was serious and competent, and their facility visit confirmed the program delivery was as strong as the paperwork suggested. Roman was excellent in the meetings, which she had expected. He had the specific executive presence that made partner organizations feel both important and anchored, heard, but also aware that the hearing was happening because they'd earned it. She watched him work across the table from her and added it to the long, complicated ledger of things she understood about him that she wished she didn't. They had dinner at a restaurant near the hotel. Not intimate, just convenient, the kind of place with good food and low enough ambient noise to have an actual conversation. They talked about the meetings, about the partner, about the initiative's first-year targets. They ordered more food than they meant to. At some point, the conversation moved sideways from work into other territory without either of them quite deciding to let it. "How did you end up in nonprofit development?" he asked, over what remained of the food. She considered the question. The easy version, the professional biography version, was right there. She gave him the other one instead. "My dad lost his job when I was 11. My mom worked 2 jobs for 3 years while he looked for work. We stayed in our house by exactly 1 thread for most of that. A social worker came and helped us navigate every program available to us. Housing assistance, food support, my dad's retraining, all of it. We kept the house. Dad got a better job eventually. Mom quit one of hers." She turned her wine glass. "The social worker's name was Patricia Okafor, and I think about her at least once a week." Roman was quiet. "So," Savannah said, "that's the version." "It's a good reason," he said. "What about you?" She looked at him directly. "The legitimate work. Why build it instead of just keeping the other thing?" The question was direct enough to be a risk. She knew it. She asked it anyway. He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "My mother," he said. "She died when I was 14. She'd spent the last 2 years of her life trying to push my father toward the legitimate side of the business. She believed it was possible. He looked at his glass. She didn't live to see it. I figured someone should. The restaurant moved around them. Other tables, other conversations, the soft percussion of a normal evening in a city that had nothing to do with them. "Clara," Savannah said quietly. "Yeah." His voice was lower. "Clara was 8 when my mother died. I made a lot of decisions fast at that age about who I needed to be to keep us both afloat. Some of those decisions I can live with. Some of them I've been working backward from ever since." "Is that what this is?" She gestured vaguely, meaning the foundation, the initiative, all of it. He looked at her. "Part of it." A pause. "The other part is that it's just worth doing, independent of where it came from." She nodded. Outside the window, Boston did its nighttime thing. Quieter than New York, denser somehow. The old city bones visible underneath everything. 4 years ago, Roman said. His voice had shifted again. "Supposons, careful now, deliberate. At the engagement party, when I assumed we've covered that. We covered the apology. We haven't covered the rest of it." She went still. "What rest of it?" He looked at her across the table. In the low light of the restaurant, the careful executive composure had worn down to something more unguarded. Not vulnerable exactly, because she suspected Roman Voss hadn't been fully vulnerable in approximately 20 years, but something closer to it than she'd ever seen. "The rest of it," he said slowly, "is that I watched you for the rest of that night and I couldn't stop. And I've been watching you for 4 years and I couldn't stop. And I hired you because you were the right person for the job, but also because..." He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. "I couldn't keep not finding a reason to be in the same room as you." The restaurant kept existing. The wine was still on the table. Her hands were very still in her lap. "Roman," she said. Her voice came out barely above the ambient noise. "I know," he said. "I know what I am and what my world is and all the reasons why this is a problem. I'm not asking you for anything. He exhaled. "I needed you to know that." She looked at him for a long moment. The weight of 4 years sitting between them on the table. All the sharpness and the distance and the careful hostility she'd deployed like armor because she'd understood from the very first night that this was a man she needed to protect herself from. Not because he was dangerous, though he was. Because he was the specific kind of dangerous that bypassed all her usual defenses. "The train's at 7:15 tomorrow," she said. He nodded. "I know. We should get the check." "Yes." She looked at him one more time. "Roman." He waited. "I know too," she said. "That's the problem." She reached for her wallet. He reached for the check. Their hands crossed over the table. And neither of them moved for a full second. Her fingers brushing the edge of the check folder. His hand arriving at the same moment. The contact brief and accidental and somehow the loudest thing that had happened all evening. She pulled back first. He let her. They split the check without discussing it. They walked back to the hotel in the cold Boston night with 4 feet of sidewalk between them and said nothing that mattered, which was its own form of saying everything. The lobby was warm and quiet. The elevator came. They stepped in. 4th floor. His room was 412, hers was 408. She got out first. Walked to her door. Her key card was in her coat pocket, and she found it on the first try, which felt like a small mercy. "Savannah." She stopped with her hand on the door. Didn't turn around. She heard him exhale. A long, controlled breath. The kind that cost something. 7:15, he said. "I'll meet you in the lobby at 6:45. 6:45, she confirmed. She went inside. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed in her coat for 11 minutes, not taking it off, not turning on additional lights, just sitting in the dim room with the Boston night pressing against the curtains and the specific weight of what had just happened at dinner settling into her bones. He had said it out loud. After 4 years of everything being conducted in the language of glances and sharp words and professional precision deployed as substitute for everything they weren't saying, he had simply said it. In a restaurant, over leftover food and wine, in the particular low voice of a man who had decided that the cost of silence had finally exceeded the cost of truth. And she had said, "I know too," because she did. Because she had known for 4 years and spent 4 years building increasingly elaborate architecture around the knowing. And now the architecture had a crack in it, and she could feel cold air coming through. She took her coat off. She set an alarm for 6 a.m. She did not sleep well. The train ride back to New York the following evening was different from the morning trip down. The Boston meetings had filled the day, full and demanding and professionally successful. And there had been the buffer of other people, of agendas and site visits, and the particular performance of 2 senior executives representing a serious foundation. But by 5 p.m., they were back on the platform and the buffer was gone. They sat across from each other in the quiet car. Roman read documents for the first 40 minutes. Savannah worked on her laptop. The Connecticut shoreline moved past the windows in the dark, just the occasional light of a house or a station punctuating the black. At some point, she became aware that he'd stopped reading. She kept her eyes on her screen. "I shouldn't have said it," he said, quietly. The quiet car lived up to its name. No one nearby, the ambient sound of the train low and even. She looked up from the laptop. "Which part? Any of it?" He was looking out the window. Profile to her. "It's not fair to you. I'm a grown person. I get to decide what's fair to me. You work for me. I work for the foundation. Same thing." "It's not the same thing." She closed the laptop. "And that's not actually what you're worried about." He looked at her then. The train moved. The dark outside the window moved with it. "What am I worried about?" His voice was careful, genuinely asking, not deflecting. She considered the question for a real moment. "You're worried that I'll get hurt," she said, "because of what you are and what you're involved in and what that means for people close to you." His jaw shifted. Not confirmation, not denial, just the involuntary physical response of someone who has been accurately read. "That's not your call," she said. "It affects you. That makes it partly my call." "Roman." She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table between them. "I've known what you are for 4 years. I've been in rooms with you for 4 years. I read the Meridian file. I know about the other operations, not specifically, but in the way that anyone paying attention knows. I'm not naive about what your world contains. Knowing about it and living next to it are different things." "I know that too." "Then you know why I'm saying what I'm saying." "I know why you're saying it," she said. "I think you're also saying it because it's easier than the other thing." He was quiet. "The other thing being actually afraid," she said, "of wanting something you might lose." The train moved through a station without stopping, a blur of light and platform, and then dark again. Roman's expression in the window reflection was doing something she'd never seen it do before. Not cracking exactly, but the controlled surface showing the stress lines beneath it. "Yes," he said. Just that. One word, flat and honest, and costing him something visible. Savannah sat back in her seat. Her heart was going at a pace she was choosing to ignore. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They didn't say anything else until Penn Station. But when they stepped onto the platform and the crowd moved around them, and she turned to say something ordinary and logistical about Monday morning, he was looking at her in the specific way he looked at her when he wasn't trying to manage what his face was doing, open and complicated and carrying the particular expression of a man who has accepted that something is already in motion that he cannot stop. She said goodnight. He said goodnight. She took the subway home. She did not call Kezia. She lay in her own bed in her own apartment and stared at the ceiling and understood, with the complete clarity that arrives sometimes in the quiet dark, that there was no version of the next chapter of her life in which she did not love Roman Voss. She had loved him for 4 years. She was going to keep loving him. The only remaining question was what she was going to do with that information. She fell asleep before she found the answer. Monday came with the particular aggressive efficiency of Monday mornings in December. Cold, gray, the city in full pre-holiday momentum, everyone moving with the specific urgency of people who have too much to finish before the year ends. Savannah was in the office by 8:15. Roman was already there. She could tell by the light under his door and the coffee Daniel had clearly just brought through. They were professional, entirely professional. They had back-to-back meetings about the initiative's first quarter rollout, sat across from each other in 2 different conference rooms, exchanged documents and observations, and made decisions that would affect the lives of thousands of people. And if anyone in those rooms sensed any current running beneath the professional surface, they had the discretion not to show it. At noon, Savannah's phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She was in the middle of a document review, and unknown numbers during work hours were usually either solicitation or wrong numbers, and she had a habit of letting them go to voicemail. Something made her pick it up. Ms. Cross? The voice was male, mid-range, slightly raspy, not aggressive, careful. Yes, who is this? My name isn't important right now. I have information you should see before you spend any more time building something for Roman Voss. She went very still. Her hand tightened on the phone. I'm going to need more than that. There's a coffee shop on West 47th, Cassidy's. Can you be there in 20 minutes? I don't meet with people who won't tell me who they are. Ms. Cross. A pause. What I have involves the foundation, and it involves money, a significant amount of it, and it involves the reason your predecessor left. She had been told the previous creative director had left for personal reasons. It was the kind of explanation that could mean anything and that she had not examined closely because she'd been too busy building forward to spend time looking backward. 30 minutes, she said, and you better have something real. I have something real. She hung up, sat for a moment. Then she picked up her coat and bag, told Julia she had an off-site meeting, and walked out. Cassidy's was the kind of coffee shop that had been there for 30 years and had survived every wave of the neighborhood, changing around it through sheer stubborn mediocrity. Functional, slightly dingy, beloved by no one and abandoned by no one. She arrived to find a man already in a corner booth. 50s, salt and pepper, the specific worn quality of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. He introduced himself as Paul Garrett. He was, he said, a former financial compliance officer. He had worked, until 8 months ago, for a firm that handled accounting for several of the Voss business entities, including the foundation. He put a folder on the table. Savannah opened it. The documents inside were financial records, transaction logs, internal transfer authorizations, correspondence. She was good with numbers. She had spent years following money through organizational structures, understanding how funding moved and where it went and what the gap between stated purpose and actual disbursement looked like. She understood what she was looking at within 4 minutes. The foundation had been used over a period of approximately 14 months to move money that was not charitable funding. The mechanism was sophisticated, layered transfers, legitimate programming funds running parallel to a second stream that moved through partner organizations that existed on paper and nowhere else. The amounts were not enormous in the context of the foundation's total budget, but they were significant, and the authorization signatures were consistent. Roman's signature was on some of them, his CFO, Marcus Webb, on others. She sat with the folder open in front of her for a long moment. The coffee shop moved around her. Someone was playing something forgettable on the sound system. The man across from her was watching her with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to watch someone else understand something he's been carrying alone. When did this happen? Her voice was very flat. 14 months starting in late 2022. It stopped about 8 months ago. Why did it stop? The previous creative director found similar documentation during a financial audit. She went to Roman directly. He paused. She left the foundation 2 weeks later. Savannah closed the folder. She pressed her hands flat on the table. Her face felt oddly numb. Not shock exactly, but the specific physical response of a body managing information it hasn't processed yet. How did you get these? I kept copies when I left. Insurance. Why are you bringing them to me? His eyes were steady. Because the initiative you're building is real. The work you're doing is real. And you're about to build something significant on a foundation that has been used for things it shouldn't have been. You should know what you're standing on. She stared at the folder. The previous director, she said. Did she go to anyone else? Law enforcement? Anyone outside the organization? Not that I know of. And nothing has happened since? No investigation? No, not publicly. He leaned forward slightly. Ms. Cross, the people whose money moved through those accounts, they're not people who get investigated easily. She understood what he was saying. She had always understood in the abstract what Roman's world contained. She had said as much on the train 2 days ago, with the particular calm confidence of a woman who thought she'd made peace with the information. She had not made peace with this. She pushed the folder back across the table. I'll need copies. Those are yours. She picked up the folder, put it in her bag. She did not thank him, because there was nothing in her at that moment that felt like gratitude for what he'd just handed her. There was something else, something cold and structural, the sensation of a floor she had been standing on revealing itself to be less solid than she'd believed. She walked back to the office. She sat at her desk and stared at the wall for 7 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called Roman's direct line. He answered on the first ring. Yes. I need to see you, now, your office. A beat. What's... Now, Roman. Hassan. He was at his desk when she came in. He looked at her face and stood up. She recognized the shift, the immediate assessment, the way his body reorganized itself toward whatever was happening in the room. She put the folder on his desk. He looked at it without touching it, then at her. Open it, she said. He opened the folder. She watched him read. She watched the expression on his face change. Not dramatically, because Roman Voss did not do dramatic facial expressions, but in the specific micro-adjustments of a man who is recognizing something. Not discovering. Recognizing. That was when she knew. You knew, she said. Her voice came out very quiet. He closed the folder. Roman. The quiet was gone now, something harder underneath it. Tell me you didn't know. He looked at her. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the thing where they held everything in place behind the surface. But she was close enough, and she had been watching his face long enough to see what was happening underneath. He said nothing. The previous creative director found this same documentation, she said. She brought it to you. You let her leave, and you buried it. Her voice was not rising. She was aware of keeping it flat, because flat was the only thing she had right now. Tell me that's not what happened. It's not that simple. Tell me, what happened? He set his hands on the desk. Flat. The same way she'd pressed hers on the table at Cassidy's 20 minutes ago. The gesture of someone trying to hold their own surface steady. Marcus brought me the discrepancy 14 months ago. He thought it was an error. It wasn't an error. He exhaled through his nose. It was money that moved through this foundation because someone in my organization made a decision I hadn't authorized. I found out. I stopped it. I cleaned it. And the previous director? A beat. She found similar documents during her audit. She confronted me. I told her what I'm telling you. That it was stopped, that it was cleaned, that it wouldn't happen again. She didn't believe me. She left. And you let the whole thing disappear. I handled it internally. You buried it. I stopped it. His voice had gone very controlled, the kind of controlled that cost significant effort. Every dollar is accounted for. Every account is clean. The Foundation's programming was never compromised. That is not the point. Her voice finally broke the flat surface. Not shouting, but raw. Actual unmanaged rawness. Roman, I have been building something here. I have been bringing organizations into a partnership with this foundation. Real organizations with real people and real communities depending on what we're promising them. I have been telling them this is solid ground. It is solid ground. Is it? She put her hand on the folder. Is it solid ground, or is it ground that has had money laundered through it that you cleaned up and hoped no one would ever find? His jaw tightened. The foundation is clean. The foundation has a history that you never disclosed to me. The history is resolved. You don't get to decide what I needed to know about the thing I agreed to run. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and she hated it. Hated the crack in it. Hated that he could hear how much this was costing her. You hired me because I was honest. You said that. You said I don't perform for donors, but you didn't give me the same thing you said you wanted from me. The room was absolutely still. Roman looked at her. His face had done something she had never seen it do in 4 years. The controlled surface was still there. It was always there. It was structural. She didn't think he could fully remove it even when he wanted to. But underneath it, something that looked like genuine pain. You're right, he said. She stared at him. You're right, he said again, quieter. I should have told you before you accepted the position. I didn't. I told myself it was resolved and therefore not relevant, and that was... He stopped, started again. That was me deciding what you needed to know. And you're right that I don't get to do that. She had been prepared for defense, for justification, for the specific legal and strategic reasoning that powerful men deploy when they are cornered. She had not been prepared for that. I don't know what to do with that, she said honestly. I know. I don't know if I can stay in this position. Something moved across his face. I know. Don't do that. Her voice went sharp. Don't accept it with no resistance. Don't... She stopped herself. She was shaking slightly. She hadn't noticed until this moment. I am trying to figure out if I can trust the ground I'm standing on, and you're just absorbing it. Like it doesn't cost you anything. It costs me everything, he said, low and direct and without any of the controlled flatness. Just the raw fact of it, delivered straight. You want to know what costs me everything? This does. You walking out that door does. I have spent 4 years watching you from a distance that I kept because I knew this was possible. I knew my world could compromise yours, and then I let you in anyway because I couldn't keep not letting you in, and now here we are, exactly where I was afraid we'd end up. The room held the words. Savannah stood very still. Her bag was on her shoulder. The folder with its damning documents was on his desk between them. There's something else, Paul Garrett had said, as she was standing to leave Cassidy's. She had almost not heard it. The people whose money ran through those accounts, when they found out it had been cleaned up and routed away from them, they weren't just unhappy about the money. She had looked back at him. There are people in Roman Voss's world right now, he said, who believe he stole from them, and they are looking at the people closest to him to find a way to communicate that. She had not told Roman that part yet. She looked at him across the desk, the folder between them, the winter light through the windows, the cost of the last 10 minutes visible on both their faces. She reached into her bag. She put Paul Garrett's business card on top of the folder. He told me something else, she said. At the end, Roman looked at the card. His expression changed in a way she had no vocabulary for yet. Read it, she said. His name is on the card. You'll know who he is. She watched him pick up the card, watched the recognition arrive on his face. Not slow, not uncertain, immediate. The specific recognition of a man who has been waiting for a particular threat to materialize and has just watched it do so. Savannah. His voice had changed completely. The professional register, the controlled intimacy of the last hour. All of it stripped away. What was underneath was something older and considerably more urgent. Where did you meet him? Coffee shop on 47th. He called me out of nowhere this morning. He called you. He set the card down. His hands were very still. He specifically called you. Yes. He knew your name. He knew your number. He knew I worked here. Yes. Savannah. He came around the desk, not toward her aggressively, but with a directness and a speed that made her take one instinctive step back. He stopped. His eyes were on her face. Paul Garrett worked for people who are currently very motivated to find a way to get my attention. He didn't call you because he wanted to give you information. He called you because someone sent him to find out how close you are to me. The room went cold. She understood it in pieces, the way understanding arrives when you don't want it to. Reluctant, assembling itself against your resistance. The unknown number. The specific knowledge of her name in direct line. The information delivered just precisely enough to damage her trust in Roman without being so damaging that she would leave the building entirely. They were testing, she said slowly, whether I'd come to you or go around you. They were mapping, he said. How close? How much leverage? The folder on the desk. The card on top of it. The whole constructed architecture of the last 2 hours suddenly visible from the outside as what it actually was. Not a disclosure, not a whistleblower's conscience. A probe. A hand reaching into Roman Voss's world to find what was soft. And she had walked straight into it. My number, she said. How did he get my direct? Someone inside this building gave it to him, Roman said. His voice was absolutely flat now. The voice from the gala, from behind Harris and Alcott, old and patient and completely without mercy. Someone in this organization is communicating with people who want to use you to get to me. She stared at him. You need to go home, he said. Right now. Take nothing from your desk. Tell no one where you're going. I need to make some calls, and I need to do it in the next... I'm not going home while you... Savannah. He said her name the way he'd said it on the train, in the restaurant. Every time that name in his voice meant something larger than the word. Please, give me 2 hours. I will call you. But right now, I need you somewhere that isn't this building. She looked at him. The man she'd spent 4 years constructing a careful distance from. The man who had said it costs me everything, with the flat, unmanaged honesty of someone who has stopped knowing how to lie about this particular thing. The man whose world had just confirmed every fear she had ever had about loving him. 2 hours, she said. 2 hours. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. Savannah? She stopped, her hand on the frame. I'm sorry, he said. For the things I didn't tell you, I'm sorry. She didn't answer. She walked out into the corridor where the normal sounds of a normal working afternoon moved around her like she was underwater. And she pressed the elevator button with a hand that was steadier than she felt. And she rode down 22 floors in the company of her own reflection in the brushed steel doors. She rode down 22 floors in the company of her own reflection in the brushed steel doors and did not recognize the woman looking back at her. Not because of what she'd learned, because of what she was feeling about what she'd learned. The specific, unwanted complexity of it. The way the anger and the fear and the things she'd spent 4 years refusing to name had all collapsed into one undifferentiated pressure in her chest that she couldn't organize into anything clean. The lobby, the revolving door, the cold December air hitting her face like a correction. She walked 2 blocks before she stopped on a corner and just stood there, breath visible, traffic moving around her with its usual indifference. Her phone was in her coat pocket. She did not call Kezia. She did not call anyone. She stood on the corner and breathed through the pressure until it was manageable, and then she started walking again. She went home. She sat in her apartment with her coat still on and waited. Roman called at 4:53. She picked up before the second ring. Are you inside? His voice was clipped, different from every other version of his voice she'd cataloged. Yes. My apartment. Lock the door if it isn't already. She looked at her door. She had locked it automatically, the habit of a woman living alone in New York for 8 years. It's locked. Good. She heard him exhale. Something in the background, movement, low voices, a door closing. Paul Garrett works for a man named Vincent Cale. Cale had a financial interest in one of my father's operations that my father promised him a share of. That promise died with my father. Cale has been trying to collect on it for 6 years. Through the foundation. His people found a weak point in the organization 14 months ago. A mid-level financial manager named Curtis who needed money and made a very bad decision. I found out. I removed Curtis. I cleaned the accounts. I did not... A pause. I did not handle Cale directly at that time. I thought removing the mechanism was sufficient. It wasn't. No. Flat. It wasn't. He's been building a different approach ever since, using people on the edges, finding leverage. Another pause. You were the leverage he settled on. Her stomach tightened. Because of how close we are. Silence on the line. Roman. Yes, he said. Because of how close we are. She pressed her free hand against her thigh. What does he want? He wants me to acknowledge the original promise my father made and pay him what he's decided it was worth, which is significantly more than it was ever worth, and is effectively a demand for money I would be paying indefinitely because men like Cale don't have a finish line. And if you don't, then he escalates. His voice was very even, the specific evenness of someone choosing their words with surgical care. He has made it clear that escalation would involve people connected to me, people connected to him. The phrase landed precisely where it was meant to. Clara, Savannah said. Clara is in Seattle. She has security she doesn't fully know about. She's been covered since Tuesday. A beat. He doesn't know about Clara specifically. He knows about you. The apartment was very quiet. The December cold pressed against the windows. She could hear her own breathing. Savannah? His voice dropped. I need you to understand that I am handling this. I need you to understand that I would not have let you walk into this building 6 weeks ago if I had believed... Don't. Her voice came out sharp. Don't tell me what you would or wouldn't have done because you don't know. You didn't tell me about the 14 months. You made a decision about what I needed to know, and it was the wrong one, and we are both standing in the consequences of it. Silence. You're right, he said. Again. The same 2 words from across his desk an hour ago, and they cost him the same thing both times. She stood up, pulled off her coat. Her hands were not shaking anymore. She had moved through something on the walk home, not past it, but through it, and on the other side was a particular kind of clarity that she recognized as the thing that arrived when there was no option but forward. What are you doing right now? She said. I have 3 people looking at Cale's current organization. I need to know where he operates from, who he uses, and what his timeline looks like. And then I'm going to have a conversation with him. What kind of conversation? A pause that told her everything. The kind that ends this. She put her coat on the couch, sat down. Roman, if you go at him directly and it goes wrong, it won't go wrong. You don't know that. I know how to handle Vincent Cale. You've been handling him for 6 years and he just used me to map your vulnerabilities. Her voice was steady, harder than steady. That's not handling him. That's maintaining a stalemate while he builds a better strategy. Silence on the line, longer this time. What are you saying? He said. I'm saying you need to stop managing this defensively and end it. Actually, end it. She stood again. She was better thinking on her feet, always had been. What does he actually need? Not what he says he wants. What does he need? Money, acknowledgement, status. Which of those is real? A pause. The money. Then give him a number that ends it, a real number. One payment, documented, structured as a legal settlement for a historical business dispute. Make it real on paper. Make it something he can't come back from because coming back would mean admitting the first payment happened. He'll want more than a settlement. Then make the settlement large enough that wanting more is irrational. Her voice was clipped now, the professional problem-solving part of her brain cutting through everything else. You have the resources. You have lawyers who have handled worse. Structure it so that accepting the settlement requires him to sign documents that would expose him if he violated the terms. Give him a door out that costs him his leverage entirely. Quiet on the line. She could hear him thinking, not literally, but she had spent enough hours across tables from this man to know the texture of his silences. That's not how my world typically resolves these things, he said. I know. But your world's typical resolution leaves bodies and investigations and consequences that ripple for years. You've been trying to build something legitimate. Build this legitimately. Cale isn't a legitimate person. He doesn't need to be. You do. The line was quiet for a long moment. I'll call you back, he said. Roman. Yes. She pressed her lips together. There were 17 things she wanted to say, and most of them were not about Vincent Cale, and none of them were things she was ready to say on a phone call in her apartment at 5 p.m. in December. Be careful, she said. He was quiet for a second. Always. He hung up. She sat in the apartment and the December dark gathered outside and she waited. He did not call back in 2 hours. He did not call back in 3. At 8:15 her phone rang, and it was not Roman. It was a number she didn't recognize, and something in her stomach contracted before she answered. Ms. Cross. The voice was smooth, slightly accented, the English of someone who learned it as a second language in circumstances that required precision. My name is Vincent Cale. She went absolutely still. I understand you've had an interesting afternoon, he said. There was something in his voice, not threatening exactly. The particular comfortable menace of a man who has been in control of rooms his entire life and sees no reason to perform aggression when simple presence is sufficient. How did you get this number? Her voice was flat. The same way I get most things. Patience and the right people. A pause. I want to be direct with you. Roman Voss is currently in a meeting that I arranged. He is not in a position to call you back for some time. I thought it would be more considerate to let you know that rather than leave you waiting. The cold that moved through her was different from anything she'd felt that afternoon. Specific. Physical. What kind of meeting, she said. The kind where 2 people discuss a long-standing matter without interruption. His voice remained smooth. He is not being harmed, Ms. Cross. I'm not interested in that kind of resolution. I'm interested in a conversation that I have been trying to have for 6 years and which Roman has been successfully avoiding. Then have the conversation and let him leave. That's exactly what I intend. A pause. I called you because I think you understand something that Roman sometimes forgets. Some problems can only be solved by acknowledging them entirely, not managing them, not containing them, acknowledging them and paying what's owed. You called me to tell him to pay you. I called you, Cale said, because you have more influence with him than anyone in his organization right now, and because I want him to understand that influence has a shape, that people near him are visible, that visibility can be uncomfortable. The threat was immaculate, not a threat at all technically, just a description of geometry. Tell me where he is, she said. That's not, tell me where he is or this conversation is over. A beat of silence. Something in Cale's breathing, not surprise. Something more like a recalibration, the sound of a man who has just discovered that the card he thought he was holding has a different value than he assigned it. He's at a property in Long Island City, Cale said. I'll text you the address after this call, as a gesture of good faith. Your good faith involves holding a man in a location against his will. He came voluntarily. My people simply suggested it would be in his interest to stay until the conversation concluded. Send me the address. She was already up, coat in hand. Ms. Cross. Cale's voice had shifted slightly. I would encourage you to think carefully before... Send the address. She hung up. Her hands were shaking now. Not with fear. With the specific muscular anger of someone who has been precisely and deliberately threatened through the person they love, and has decided that the correct response is not to wait in her apartment to see how it resolves. The address came through 40 seconds later. Long Island City. A warehouse district near the water. She called a car. She pulled on boots, grabbed her bag, thought for exactly 4 seconds about calling the police, and then thought about what Roman's world would look like under that kind of scrutiny and what it would do to everything they'd built and were trying to build. And she made a decision she couldn't fully defend and grabbed her keys anyway. The car took 23 minutes. She spent them with her phone in her hand, screen on, Cale's address staring back at her. She tried Roman twice, voicemail both times. Long Island City at 9 p.m. was a different city than Manhattan, quieter, industrial, the streets emptying out past the residential pockets into the zone of warehouses and storage facilities and businesses that operated during hours when the foot traffic didn't require accommodation. The address was on a block close to the waterfront, the East River somewhere in the dark beyond the buildings, the Manhattan skyline across it a blaze of light that felt very far away. The building was old brick, 3 stories, the ground floor lit behind frosted windows. A black car parked outside. One man leaning against the wall near the entrance who straightened when her car pulled up. She got out. The man looked at her, not reaching for anything, not moving to stop her, just looking. The assessment of someone whose job is assessment. Savannah Cross, she said. Cale called me. A beat. He stepped aside. She pushed through the door. The ground floor was a large open space. The bones of an old manufacturing floor cleared out. 6 folding tables set up with laptops and documents. 4 men she didn't know standing at various points in the room. And at a table near the far wall, under the one overhead light that gave the scene its particular theater, Roman. He was seated, not restrained, just seated, jacket still on, both hands on the table, looking at the man across from him when she came in. When he heard the door, he looked up. The expression on his face when he saw her was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen on it. Not relief exactly, something more complicated. The specific look of a man whose first response is the warmth of seeing her, and whose second response, arriving approximately 1 second later, is the cold fury of realizing she has walked into the exact situation he has been trying to keep her out of. Savannah? His voice was very controlled. Why are you here? Cale called me. His jaw tightened. He looked at the man across from him. 50s, lean, the smooth authority she'd heard on the phone. Vincent Cale in person was smaller than she'd expected. Most dangerous things were. Cale looked at her with the assessing interest of a man who has just had his calculation confirmed. Ms. Cross, I appreciate the promptness. Let's finish this, she said. She walked to the table, pulled out the chair beside Roman, and sat in it. Roman looked at her like she'd just done something that alarmed him more than anything else in the room, which she noted and filed and addressed later. She put her hands flat on the table. She looked at Cale. You want acknowledgement and payment. Roman wants this to end permanently. Those two things are compatible. Cale tilted his head. Is that so? There is a number, she said, that makes this conversation the last one. A settlement, legally documented, structured as resolution of a historical business dispute. In exchange, you sign documents with enough mutual exposure to make violation irrational for both parties. Both sides walk away from this building tonight, and this is over. Cale looked at her for a moment, then at Roman. You sent a woman to negotiate for you. She's not here because I sent her. Roman's voice was the flattest she had ever heard it. She's here because she makes better decisions than I do when I'm sitting across from someone I want to put through a wall. Something in Cale's expression moved, something that might have been, in a different man, amusement. The number, Savannah said. What is it? Cale named a figure. Roman's jaw moved. She put her hand on Roman's forearm under the table, not reaching for him, not holding him, just a flat pressure, grounding. He went very still. That figure, she said to Cale, is contingent on a clean exit and signed documentation tonight. If we leave this table without resolution, the figure is off. What comes next is lawyers and a very long, very expensive process that exposes the historical transactions on both sides, which I imagine is not how you'd prefer to spend the next 3 years. She held his gaze. So, do we resolve this tonight, or do we resolve it the complicated way? The room was very quiet. The men at the peripheral tables had stopped their movements. The distant sound of the river existed somewhere beyond the walls. Cale looked at her with the particular attention of someone who is recalibrating his model of a situation in real time. Your lawyers, he said finally. Can they draft tonight? Roman spoke without looking away from Cale. They can draft in an hour. Then we have something to discuss. The next 90 minutes were the strangest of Savannah's professional life. Roman made 3 calls. 2 lawyers arrived at the building at 10:40 with laptops and a printer that one of Cale's men had sourced from somewhere on the 2nd floor. Cale's own legal representation, a woman in her 40s who had the practical calm of someone accustomed to unusual hours, arrived 15 minutes after that. They worked at the table. All of them. Roman on one side, Cale on the other, Savannah beside Roman, the lawyers moving between them with documents and adjusted language and the specific technical vocabulary of people solving an ugly problem with the available tools. Roman was impeccable. She watched him work. The negotiations conducted in a register she had only seen fragments of before. The version of him that operated in the part of his world where the ordinary rules didn't apply, but where the stakes were real and physical, and the margin for error was 0. He was precise and cold, and completely without bluster, and every concession he made was strategic, and every line he held was held with a flatness that communicated very clearly that it was not moving. Once, during a disputed clause, Cale's lawyer pushed back on language that Roman was insisting on, and Roman looked at her with an expression that was not aggressive and was not warm, and was simply the complete absence of give, and the lawyer looked away first. Savannah watched this and felt something she didn't have a clean name for. Not pride, because pride implied ownership of something that wasn't hers. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of seeing someone fully for the first time after years of seeing only the parts they chose to show. At 12:15, the documents were signed. Cale stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Roman across the table with an expression that was neither conciliatory nor hostile. The look of a man who has gotten less than he wanted and more than he feared and is making his peace with the arithmetic. Your father, he said, was a man who made promises without intending to keep them. I know, Roman said. You're not him. No. Cale nodded once and walked out with his lawyer and his people, and the sound of the black car starting outside carried into the room and then moved away, and the building was quiet. Roman sat very still for a moment. Then he put both hands over his face, a gesture so human and unguarded that Savannah felt her chest tighten, and held them there for approximately 4 seconds before lowering them. He looked at her. You drove out here, he said. Yes. I told you to stay in your apartment. I know. You drove out here anyway. I did. His lawyers were gathering documents at the end of the table. creating the specific discrete busyness of professionals who understand when they are peripheral to something. Roman looked at her across the table, across the scattered papers and the remnants of a 2-hour legal emergency and the particular wreckage of a night that had restructured everything. And his expression was the most open it had ever been. "Savannah." His voice was low, stripped of everything. "Don't," she said, not harshly. "Not here. Not now." He looked at her. She looked back. The lawyers finished gathering and murmured something about sending final copies and let themselves out, and the building was very quiet, and the Manhattan skyline across the water was still burning in the dark. "I need to say one thing," he said. "Roman, one thing." He leaned forward slightly, his hands on the table, his eyes on her face with that attention that cost him something, that had always cost him something, that she had been cataloging for 4 years without letting herself understand what the cost meant. "Whatever you decide about the foundation, about any of it, I need you to know that what I told you on the train was true. What I told you at dinner in Boston was true. And tonight, when you walk through that door," he stopped, his jaw moved. "I have spent 20 years building a life where I don't let things inside the perimeter because things inside the perimeter can be used against me. You are already inside the perimeter. You have been for a long time. That's not something I can undo, and I'm not sure I would if I could." She looked at him. The room was very still. "You buried documentation that I needed to make an informed decision," she said. "Yes. You put me in a position where I was being used as a tool against you without knowing it. Yes, I take responsibility for that. Taking responsibility isn't the same as it not having happened." "I know." His voice was steady. "I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking you to—" He stopped. Something moved across his face, a kind of vulnerability that she had not thought this man was capable of producing without it costing him everything he had. "I'm asking you to tell me what it would take. To stay." The question landed in the quiet. She felt her breathing change, felt the 4 years of careful architecture between them and the crack that had opened at dinner in Boston and the fracture that had run through today, and the specific irreversible reality that she was sitting in a cleared-out warehouse in Long Island City at midnight because she had gotten into a car to come here and she had done it without hesitating, and she knew why. She knew exactly why. "Complete transparency," she said, "about the foundation, about anything that touches the work. I find something in an audit, I bring it to you directly, and you give me the actual answer, not the managed version." "Yes," he said. "The initiative stands. No one touches it for leverage, internal or external." "Agreed." "And you don't make decisions about what I need to know." Her voice was steady, harder than steady. "I am not someone you protect by keeping in the dark. That's not protection. That's control." He held her gaze. His jaw was tight. She could see it cost him, the giving up of the particular reflex that powerful men build over decades, the instinct to manage information as a form of care. She could see it cost him, and she needed it to cost him. She needed him to know it wasn't free. "Agreed," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, the remains of the night between them, the signed documents, the thing he had said about the perimeter and the 20 years of a life built to keep it intact. She stood up. He stood up. They were on the same side of the table now, not reaching for each other, just both standing in the same space in the way that two people do when the distance between them has finally reached zero, and the only remaining question is what they do with that. They were on the same side of the table, and the only remaining question was what they did with that. And the answer arrived not in words, but in the way Roman moved. One step, closing the last foot of distance between them, and then his hands were on her face, cupping it with the specific careful pressure of a man who has been afraid of breaking something for a very long time, and has finally decided the risk of holding back is greater than the risk of holding on. She let him. She let him because she was tired. Not the tired of a long day or a hard year, but the tired of 4 years of carrying something heavy and pretending it wasn't heavy, the specific exhaustion of sustained denial finally running out of fuel. She put her hands against his chest, not pushing, just placing them there, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric and his heartbeat underneath it, faster than she would have expected, which meant something. He kissed her, not tentatively, not with the careful managed precision he applied to most things, with the particular directness of a man who has waited too long and spent too much energy on the waiting and is done spending it. She kissed him back and felt the whole complicated architecture of 4 years, the sharpness and the distance and the careful performed hostility and all the words she'd aimed at him like weapons when what she actually needed was to close the space between them, felt all of it dissolve into something much simpler. When they separated, he kept his hands on her face for a moment. His forehead came down to hers. Not a gesture she would have predicted from him, too unguarded, too simply human. And that was exactly why it was the thing that finally broke her open. "Okay," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "Okay," he said. Outside the windows, the East River moved in the dark. The Manhattan skyline burned across the water. The warehouse was cold and quiet and completely indifferent to what had just happened in it, the way all spaces are indifferent to the moments that make them matter. She stepped back. He let her. His hands dropped to his sides. "I need to sleep," she said. "I know. And tomorrow we need to talk about everything. Not tonight. Tomorrow, when I'm not running on adrenaline and cold coffee and whatever this is." "Tomorrow," he agreed. He drove her home himself. No driver. He took the keys from one of his security team and drove. And she sat in the passenger seat and watched the Midtown Tunnel give way to the city and didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, and the silence between them was different from every silence they'd ever had before. All the previous silences had been strategic: information management, emotional containment, the practiced quiet of two people who'd agreed without discussing it to keep certain things untouched. This silence was just the absence of words. Nothing hidden in it, nothing being managed. She got out in front of her building. He waited until she was inside. She looked back through the glass lobby door, and he was still there, watching. And then the elevator came and she got in it and went upstairs and sat on her couch in her coat for the second time that day, and this time she cried for about 4 minutes. Not grief, not devastation, just the physical release of a body that has been holding itself at maximum tension for 16 hours and has finally been given permission to stand down. Then she washed her face, brushed her teeth, and went to sleep. She was at the foundation at 9 a.m. Not because she had decided everything was fine, because she had decided that the work mattered, and the people depending on it mattered, and that walking away from either because her personal life had gotten complicated was not something she was willing to do. Roman was already there. He looked like he'd had approximately as much sleep as she had, which was not a lot. He was in his office when she knocked on the open door, and when he looked up from his desk, something moved through his expression. Careful, checking, not assuming. "You're here," he said. "I said I'd be here." "I wasn't certain what last night." "I said what I needed from you," she said. "You agreed. The rest of it—" She moved her hand slightly, a gesture that encompassed the warehouse and the signing and the kiss and the drive home and all of it. "The rest of it is real. I'm not walking away from real things because they're complicated." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay." "Stop saying okay like it's a complete sentence." "What should I say instead?" "I don't know. Something longer." He stood up, came around the desk, stopped in front of her at a distance that was different from every previous distance. Not the professional calibration, not the managed space, but something closer. "I've been afraid of this for 4 years," he said. "Specifically this, you standing in front of me without the performance between us. I built the distance because I thought it was protection. I think I understand now that the distance was just postponement." She looked at him. "That's longer. Is it better?" "It's accurate, which is the same thing." He looked at her for one more moment and then reached out and touched her face. Not the way he had last night, not with the intensity of something finally releasing, but quietly. A thumb across her cheekbone. 3 seconds. Then he dropped his hand. "The Kale settlement documents go to legal this morning. Full audit of all foundation accounts starting Friday. Priya runs point, and you have access to everything, every level." "Good. The partner intake process. The 2 organizations we've been holding pending final approval. I want your recommendations by end of week." "You'll have them." He nodded. She turned to go. "Savannah." She stopped. She turned around. "Thank you," he said. "For last night, for coming there." "I told you," she said. "I'm not someone you protect by keeping in the dark." "I know. I mean, He stopped. The muscle in his jaw. The specific visible effort of a man who has spent a lifetime being precise with language, using it for something that keeps exceeding precision. Thank you for coming anyway. Despite having every reason not to. She held his gaze for a moment. I know what you are, she said. I've always known. That's not going to change, and I'm not pretending it will. But I also know who you are. The file I found in the archive, and the way you said your sister's name, and the way you look at work that actually matters, and the fact that you drove me home at 1 a.m. and waited until I was inside. She paused. Those things exist at the same time. That's what I decided to live with. Not the version of you that's easier to explain. The actual version. He didn't say anything. She watched his face do the thing it did. The layers moving behind the surface, things she was learning to read because she had finally stopped pretending she didn't want to read them. Go to work, she said. We have a lot to do. She walked back to her office. December moved forward. The audit Priya ran over the following 2 weeks came back clean. Completely clean. Every account, every transfer, every disbursement traceable and legitimate. Savannah read the final report twice, not because she doubted it, but because she needed to know the ground under her feet was real before she stood on it with full weight. It was real. The Kale matter disappeared with the signed documents, not noisily, not with announcement, but with the specific quiet of a resolved debt. Roman told her 3 weeks later, without being asked, that Kale had deposited the settlement and that his lawyers had confirmed all terms were being honored. He set it at her desk in the matter-of-fact register of a man reporting a completed task, and she nodded and said, good, and went back to the document she'd been reviewing, and that was the end of it. It wasn't entirely the end of it because some things don't end cleanly. The wariness that lives in your shoulders when you've been in danger doesn't just switch off, and Savannah caught herself looking at her phone differently for a while, picking up unknown numbers with a particular stillness rather than casual annoyance. But it diminished. The way most things do when the immediate crisis resolves and the aftermath becomes just the texture of a life moving forward. Derek, to his credit, came around. Not immediately, not gracefully, but after Roman had the conversation with him that Roman had promised to have, and after Savannah made an effort that cost her some pride to include him in a donor meeting where his institutional knowledge turned out to be genuinely invaluable, something shifted. He was never going to be her closest colleague, but he stopped being an opponent and became something more useful, a person who understood a dimension of the Foundation's history and relationships that she didn't, and who was willing, eventually, to share it. The Houston partnership went through. By mid-January, their program delivery numbers were already tracking above projection. Savannah sent the data to Roman with one line, Houston. He replied 40 minutes later with 2 words, I know. She smiled at her screen and went back to work. They were not loud about what was developing between them. It was not a strategic decision. Neither of them sat down and decided to manage it carefully. It was simply the nature of 2 people who had both spent years being precise about what they let the world see, finding that some things were too important to perform for an audience. Priya knew, because Priya was observant and discreet in the specific combination that made her excellent at her job. Daniel knew, because Daniel knew everything that happened within 20 feet of Roman's office and had the good judgment to treat it as information that was not his to distribute. Julia probably suspected, but asked nothing, which Savannah appreciated. The rest of the office continued in its efficient way, building the initiative that was beginning to take real shape. Partners in 7 cities now, funding streams established, program officers hired, the first cohort of participants starting to move through the work in early February. Real outcomes. Actual people in actual communities with actual access to things they'd been told were available and had never been able to reach before. Savannah drove to a site visit in Newark on a Tuesday in February, stood in a community center watching a group of 22-year-olds navigate a financial literacy workshop that the foundation was funding, and felt the specific, uncomplicated satisfaction of work that does what it says it does. Patricia Okafor, she thought. Pay it forward or don't bother. She drove back to Manhattan with the windows cracked despite the cold and the radio on, and the feeling of someone who has found the place where their effort and their purpose are the same thing. That evening, Roman was waiting at her apartment. Not dramatically. He had a key because she'd given him one 3 weeks earlier in a completely anticlimactic exchange where she'd handed it over while both of them were putting on coats to leave and said, "In case you're ever here before I am," and he had taken it and put it in his pocket and said, "Thank you," and they had gone out the door, and that was all. But the normalcy of it, the key existing, him using it, the lights on when she came home, that normalcy was its own kind of thing. After years of the distance and the performance, the ordinary was louder than the dramatic. He had made food. Not elaborately. He was not, as it turned out, a particularly skilled cook, which she had found both endearing and mildly alarming. But there was pasta, and there was sauce from a jar that he had improved with things from her refrigerator, and there was wine, and she hung up her coat and kicked off her boots, and sat at her kitchen table and told him about Newark, and the workshop, and the 22-year-olds. And he listened with his full attention in the way he listened to everything that mattered. And she watched him listening and thought, this is what 4 years of distance was protecting me from. This exact thing, this person, this specific irreducible reality of him being here. "The family estate," he said after she'd finished. She looked up from her food. "What about it?" "I want to take you there." He was looking at his glass, turning it. "Where this started. Where I mistook you for staff and you gave me a look that I spent 6 months trying to stop thinking about. I gave you several looks over the years. That first one was different." He looked at her. "I want you to see it, not as a guest at someone else's party, as someone who belongs there." She was quiet for a moment. "That's significant." "I know. The last time I was there, I was carrying champagne I didn't mean to be holding. I remember. This would be different." "Yes." He held her gaze. "That's the point." She looked at him across her kitchen table. The careful, complicated man who had walked through a door and been so entirely himself that she'd spent 4 years trying to unsee him. The man who had signed documents to protect her and driven her home in the dark and stood outside her building until she was safely inside. The man who had said it costs me everything and meant it. "Okay," she said. He smiled. Not the controlled almost smile she'd cataloged over years. An actual smile, brief and real, the kind that requires something to be genuinely good before it arrives. She pointed at her food. "This pasta is not terrible." "It's from a jar." "I know, it's still not terrible." "I'll learn to cook something real eventually." "You don't have to." "I want to." He said it simply. "There are things I want to learn that I haven't had a reason to learn before." She absorbed that, held it. Outside her kitchen window, the February city pushed forward in its usual way, cold and lit and indifferent and full of lives moving through their own complicated passages. She had lived in this city for 8 years and loved it the way you love things that are hard and real and don't accommodate weakness. She had worked in it and built in it and navigated it and survived it. She had spent 4 years carrying something heavy through it and had arrived here, at this table, at this particular Tuesday night, and the heavy thing was not gone, but it had changed shape into something she could actually hold without hiding. The Voss family estate in late February was different from October 4 years ago. The trees were bare, the ground stark and beautiful in the particular way of winter landscapes. Everything stripped to its essential structure, the bones of things visible that the full seasons kept covered. Savannah stood in the entrance hall, where she'd walked in with a champagne tray she had no business holding, and looked at the marble floors and the high ceilings and the exact spot, approximately 12 feet from where she was standing, where Roman had turned and looked at her for the first time. He was watching her from the doorway. 12 feet, she said. "About that. You were so certain I was staff. You were holding a tray. I explained that." "You did." He crossed the hall to where she was standing, stopped in front of her in the winter light coming through the tall windows. "And then you gave me the look." "What look?" He studied her face. "The look that said I was the most specifically irritating thing you'd encountered in recent memory, and you were going to remember it." That was accurate. "I know." Something in his voice, warm, which was still relatively new from him and still landed with more weight than warmth from other people did. "I went home that night and I thought about it for longer than made sense." "And did what with that?" "Decided it was nothing and went to work." He paused. "Spent the next 4 years revising that decision." She looked up at him. The estate was quiet around them. No party, No 500 guests, no ambient noise of a room performing itself for its own benefit. Just the two of them, and the winter light, and the specific weight of a place that had bookended the whole story. He put his hand in his jacket pocket. He held something out. It was small. A ring, plain and old. The gold worn in the places where it had been held and worn and handled over decades. Not elaborate. Not the kind of thing that announces itself. The kind of thing that has been carried by people who understood that the value of an object lives in what it has accompanied, not what it cost. "This was my mother's," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Not a proposal. Not yet. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the woman I was building my life around." He held it between his fingers. His eyes were on her face. "I've had it for 20 years. It hasn't gone to anyone because the right person wasn't in front of me. Until she was." He paused. "Until you were. For 4 years, standing 12 feet away, and I kept the distance because I was afraid of exactly what's happening right now, which is that I need you in a way I can't manage or contain, and it's terrifying, and I'm choosing it anyway." Savannah looked at the ring, looked at his face. The man who had spent 20 years building walls and was standing in his mother's entrance hall with his walls down and his hands open, and the particular terrified steadiness of someone who has decided that the cost of honesty is less than the cost of silence. She took the ring from his hand. She held it in her palm, felt the weight of it, the warmth from his pocket, the slight irregularity of old gold worn smooth by decades of being real. She thought about a woman she had never met who had given this to a 14-year-old boy and told him what it was for. She thought about a social worker named Patricia Okafor who had shown up for her family when the floor gave way. She thought about all the people who had pressed forward through the hard and frightening parts because the thing on the other side was worth the passage. She closed her fingers around the ring. "The proposal," she said. "When it comes, and I'm telling you now it should come, it needs to be better than this conversation." Something moved through Roman's face. "Is that a condition?" "It's a standard. I have high standards." "Good. Meet them." He looked at her for a moment. Then he laughed. A real one. The kind she had heard approximately 4 times in 4 years, and that still surprised her each time with how much it changed his face, how much younger it made him look, how much it revealed about the person who had been living under the controlled surface the whole time. She opened her hand. She held the ring back out to him. He took it, but he held her hand after. Both her hands, his wrapping around them, warm and deliberate. "Savannah Cross," he said. Not a sentence. Just her name, in his voice, carrying everything it had accumulated over 4 years of being said in corridors and conference rooms and hotel restaurants and a warehouse at midnight in Long Island City. "Roman Voss," she said back. The same weight, the same everything. He pulled her in and she let him, her forehead against his shoulder and his arms around her in the entrance hall of the house, where everything had started with a mistaken assumption and a champagne tray and a look that neither of them had been able to stop thinking about. 6 months later, the initiative's first-year report landed with numbers that made Priya cry at her desk, which she denied for approximately 48 hours before confirming to everyone who asked. 41 partner organizations, 11 cities, thousands of participants tracked through programming, outcomes that held up under scrutiny, not the massaged metrics of a foundation managing its reputation, but the hard data of work that had actually moved something. Savannah presented the report to the full board in March and stood at the head of the table with Roman on one side and Priya on the other and said what the numbers said, clearly and without embellishment, because the numbers didn't need embellishment. They were what they were. The board approved the second year of funding at an amount that made the first year look like a pilot. Derek Haynes, sitting 3 seats down the table, caught her eye during the applause and gave her a single nod. She nodded back. They would never be easy with each other, but they had learned to use each other well, which was sometimes better than easy. Roman came to find her afterward, in the corridor outside the boardroom, and stood beside her where she was looking out at the midtown skyline through the hallway window. 41 partners, he said. By year 3, I want 80. 65 is realistic. 80 is possible. He looked at her with the expression she had learned to read as his version of a smile. The thing behind his eyes that arrived when she said something that confirmed again the reason she was standing next to him. 80, he said. 80, she confirmed. She looked back at the skyline. The city in March, still cold, just beginning to consider spring, the particular quality of light that arrives when winter starts to mean it. She had lived here 8 years and loved it and fought it and navigated it, and tonight she would go home to an apartment where a key that had belonged to her was duplicated on a ring that belonged to someone else, and that fact no longer felt like something to manage. It felt like a fact of her life. Clara Voss had come to New York in January. She was 26 and bright and had her brother's eyes and her mother's mouth, and she had shaken Savannah's hand with the specific warmth of someone who has been waiting to do so for a while. They had dinner, all three of them, at a restaurant in the West Village, and Roman had watched the two of them talk about architecture and funding and the specific challenge of building things meant to last. And something in his face for the duration of that dinner was the most at rest Savannah had ever seen it. At the end of the night, Clara had hugged her and said into her ear, "He's been different since you came back into the picture. I mean that as a compliment." Savannah had said, "I'll keep him honest." Clara had laughed and said, "Good. Someone should." That. The proposal, when it came, met the standard. She would say that much and let the rest of it stay private. Between them and the spring evening on the roof of the building where Roman kept an apartment that looked over the Hudson, and the specific way he went down on one knee with the same composed but not quite composed expression he had in the entrance hall in February, and the ring that had been his mother's and was now hers, warm from his pocket, and sitting on her finger with the weight of everything it had accompanied. She said yes before he finished the sentence. He stood up and she kissed him. And the Hudson moved below them in the spring dusk, and the city did its relentless, indifferent, magnificent thing in every direction, and none of it required any further narration. The rivalry, when they told it at dinner with Kezia 4 months later, came out as comedy. Kezia sat across from both of them and listened to the full account, the engagement party and the champagne tray and the 4 years of deliberate hostility and the charity gala in Boston and the warehouse in Long Island City. And at the end of it, put her fork down and looked at Savannah with an expression of profound vindication. 4 years ago, Kezia said, over takeout, in your kitchen. Don't. I said, and I quote, "You said I had a thing for him. And you threw a napkin at me and changed the subject. I remember. And now you're wearing his mother's ring and he's sitting at my dinner table knowing how you take your coffee." Roman, across the table, had the expression of someone who is very carefully not smiling. Savannah pointed at him. "Don't. I'm not doing anything. You're doing the face. I don't have a face. You have the face." Kezia looked between them with the delight of a woman watching a confirmation of everything she has ever suspected about two people arrive fully formed at her table. She picked up her wine glass. "I would like to make a toast," she said, "to the 4 most unnecessary years in the history of two people who were obviously in love with each other from the first conversation." "It was a brief conversation," Roman said. "He assumed I was catering staff," Savannah said. "It was an honest mistake. It was an enormous mistake." "It was," he said without defense. "It led to 4 years of you perfecting the art of looking at me like I'd said something offensive every time I walked into a room. You frequently had. Some of the time. Most of the time." "Most of the time," he agreed. Kezia raised her glass. "To enormous mistakes and where they lead," she said. They clinked glasses. Outside Kezia's apartment, the city moved in its usual way, relentless and enormous and full of its own complicated truths, entirely indifferent to the particular small human story that had finally, after 4 years of postponement and performance, and the specific cowardice that masquerades as self-protection, arrived at the only ending it was ever going to have. Not perfect, not without cost or history, or the particular weight of two people who had carried hard things for a long time before finding someone to carry them with, but real, earned, the kind of love that has been tested by the specific tests each of them presented to the other and has held anyway. The masks were gone. The performances were retired. The game, the long, exhausting, entirely unnecessary game of pretending, was over. And two stubborn, complicated, imperfect people sat at a table with someone who loved them both and drank wine and told the story of how they got here, and laughed at the parts that hurt, because that was what you did with things that had finally finished costing you and started being yours. The Mafia Boss, who had built a life around the distance he kept, the woman who had called it by its real name when he couldn't, and the 4 years of space between them that had finally, completely, irrevocably closed.